this is going to be an interesting talk. I think it's great. I got sent a video by a friend of mine who knows that I love this stuff, and I'm always looking for stuff to talk about, especially for meditation. I used to do a unique talk every single Thursday. That was most of the times before the baby times. Now we're in the baby time, so I do like 2 talks a month. But it's hard to come up with 50 topics a year. Usually they end up sounding kind of the same. So this one is this video, and maybe you guys have even seen it, some of you. This was a Harvard professor who was taking questions from people on Twitter, and he's like a happiness expert, whatever that means. I think there's an actual term for it. But I liked a lot of his answers, and I'll kind of riff off of them myself. The first one I thought, I don't think I've ever actually heard of happiness versus unhappiness in these terms before. Somebody was asking about basically saying, like, I know that it's really important to get enough sleep and the impact of diet and all that on happiness, and is this like the key to happiness? And he said something that blew my mind. He's like, that's not actually going to make you happy, getting enough sleep. And let me tell you, as somebody who has had not enough sleep lately, I totally took offense to this. Not happy because not getting enough sleep is absolutely abysmal. I'm used to getting like 8 or 9 hours of sleep, and I have not been getting that. But he said, those things don't make you happy. They reduce your unhappiness. And on one level, you can think like that's just kind of semantics, but I think to his point, it's like they're opposing forces, and probably if you actually treat them as such, this will be a more useful way to kind of think of this and deal with this. So, of course, if we see it all purely as like one channel, it's like I'm just trying to increase happiness. But if you look at them as 2 opposing forces, when you decrease unhappiness, that leaves you with more total happiness, which is great. So I thought that was wonderful. And there are lots of things that we can do to decrease unhappiness, and a couple of the other things I'll talk about are certainly about that. But absolutely, if you're like, Sifu, I'm doing all the right things, I'm practicing gratitude, I'm meditating, I'm doing all this stuff, yet I'm still just like, I'm tired and pissed off all the time, you might just need to sleep or change your diet or whatever it is to reduce that energy of unhappiness. He went into this topic that I love to talk about all the time, the cycle of desire, or the hedonic treadmill, this concept that society has kind of tricked us into believing, which really works for capitalism, which is like, I need more. I'm not happy enough, I got to get more. We talked about this with cars or apartments or whatever. It's like I always want the bigger, better thing, and there's no end to that. And even when we get what we want, that only lasts for a minute, and then we want the next thing. And there is a dopamine rush when we get what we want, right? But then it wears off. And that leaves us kind of always looking for that next high by getting the next thing or, achieving the next goal, whatever it is. And some of that can be healthy, but if we are expecting to be lastingly happy by always seeking that next dopamine rush by getting the next thing, especially if it's from a materialist standpoint, it's just not going to last. So this professor was talking about the idea of satisfaction, and I really like the way that he put this, saying satisfaction is all of the things that you have divided by the things that you want. And it could also just be a simpler math problem if you suck at division like I do. It's like it's the more things that you have versus the less things that you want. It could just be a plus and minus. But the more things that we want, that's kind of like adding in a way to the unhappiness. So if we can work on the denominator, if we can work on the letting go of those desires, that's huge. I was talking about this earlier. I want to say I was talking about this with the kids in kids class, and I cannot remember why I was talking about it. But the gist of it was like, you're going to do amazing things. Maybe you're, some of these kids are like 5 years old. Maybe one of them will actually go to Mars someday. Something incredible like that. But if you have to constantly be seeking that next amazing thing, and the only way that we can be satisfied with life is through those things, it's going to be disappointment. So the key to happiness on some level is lowered expectations. And that sounds terrible, and it's got such a terrible connotation. People are like, no, of course not. That's a terrible way to look at life, lower your expectations. You should expect so much. But look, where has it gotten you so far? Just unhappiness. The more you desire, the more unhappiness is there. So the less you desire, if you can be totally happy with what you have now, then you're totally happy. Wonderful. The next section was talking about basically the function of emotion and the three basic areas or functions of the brain. We have like our ancient brain. I've heard this described as the lizard brain, with a part of our brain that we share with lizards and really ancient organisms. And this is just like what controls breathing and motor function and really basic stuff. There's no emotional kind of part of that. That's just like in the brain stem. And then the limbic system, I don't know where this is in the brain. And this is not entirely like scientific. He said like this is like a shortcut way of thinking about it. The limbic system is kind of what's taking the signals from the world and what's happening to us and kind of transforming that into emotion or feeling. It's like, how are we feeling about this or that? You know, am I angry? Am I hungry? Whatever. And then the highest kind of part of our brain is that information is delivered to areas like the prefrontal cortex, where then we get to kind of separate from these feelings and desires and emotions and then make decisions. And a lot of people have a hard time with this. I think for sure, for me, especially before I started meditating, I had zero ability to do this. It's like I have a feeling, an emotion, and I just like act on it. And this is how most of us do. We feel a certain way about something. That feeling just drives us immediately to act. And there absolutely should be a pause or kind of a separation there, an ability to experience and think about what that emotion is or what that feeling is, and then decide, do I want to act on this, right? Maybe you're grappling in jiu-jitsu and the emotion you feel is like, I'm going to get killed right now because I feel like I'm getting suffocated by this person pushing down on me. And so then your natural reaction is to just like brute force fight against it. But you can't actually feel that and decide, oh, I know what this feeling is, I've been here before, and I can choose a different way out of it. I can choose to kind of relax into it, or I can choose to kind of sneak around in this way or that way. So the physicality of our practice is meant to help us deal with a lot of these emotions and these feelings. And this is part of the idea behind sparring and free grappling. You can imagine if it were an actual self-defense situation you're experiencing for the first time, what it's like to be squished or punched, or just the aggression or the emotion coming at you. You feel that for the first time, and then you feel that emotional response. If you've never experienced it before, you are almost for sure not going to make great decisions. You're going to end up making terrible decisions. And so part of our practice is to help us experience them, and then almost for sure the first couple of times we experience it, we don't act in a rational or useful way. We act in a way that is just kind of fighting against it, and we gas ourselves out, or we end up, getting a little bit hurt or whatever. So then the next time we go, well, that didn't work the last time I did this, so let me try to create a little bit of separation and see if there's a better way to handle it. And really the same thing should then transfer out into everyday life. This is one of the genius things, is really the challenge in martial arts, where it is absolutely like we get face to face with our ego takes charge. And when we get to experience that, then when we're able to kind of recognize it and separate from it a little bit, then we can actually choose the way that we want to respond. It's a very high level way of being. The next part started talking about gratitude, and on some level, like all of our practice, including meditation, is this basic idea of we're practicing what we want to perform. In martial arts class, we say practice exactly what you want to perform. And it's like the physicality of your technique. If you do it thousands of times, that just becomes the way that you do it. But the thoughts that we have and the emotions that we are choosing to cultivate, it works the same way. In the same way that we create these connections between pathways, or kind of these ruts that our body falls into, the mind falls into the same kinds of ruts. And the stronger these connections are between thoughts, the more easily we'll fall into those same patterns of thoughts. So we could choose, and look, you're always making a choice, even if it's through apathy. If you're just deciding, like, I'm just going to let it happen, whatever kind of thoughts I get are the ones that I'm going to go with, okay. Or you can choose a specific way that you want to be. So choosing gratitude is great. If you want to be more grateful and you want to be happier, then practicing gratitude. And it's not complicated. The way that he suggests is you just literally make a list of the 5 things that you're the most grateful for. So you do this like on Sunday, and then every night before you go to bed, you're just reading through that list. And you don't just read the things and be like, oh, I'm grateful for my parents, I'm grateful for pizza. Like, you want to actually feel it and kind of get into that level of it where you are actually feeling gratitude. And it's like a physical feeling. It might be like a warmth in your chest or something like that. And so when we practice feeling that, apparently they've studied this, because he said if you do this each week, you make a new list each week, and then you actually take that time at the end of the night, you allow yourself to feel that gratitude. Then after 10 weeks, they measured that you are 15 to 25% happier. Now, I don't know if I assume that's just like they ask people, are you happier? And they measure it on a scale of whatever. I assume that they weren't like measuring the brain, how happier you are. But I'm sure that that is true on some level, because if we practice being more grateful, we will for sure become more grateful. And not only in that moment where you're reading through the list, but throughout the day. Because every time we practice it, every time we strengthen those connections, we're more and more likely to have it. So recognize we're either choosing this, or even by inaction, we're choosing something else. He talked about happiness being the combination of 3 things. So enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. And this is not really scientific, but I like this way of thinking of it. Enjoyment is like conscious pleasure. So it's not just I happen to be eating a delicious slice of pizza. It is like I'm consciously, you guys can tell that I'm hungry for pizza now tonight. I'm consciously choosing to enjoy it. I had this experience eating cereal. I ate cereal from the age of whenever. I was probably 3 years old when I started eating cereal, until pretty recently. And when I started practicing martial arts, I was like, oh, I can choose to be in the moment and like really enjoy this thing. So I was like 17 or 18 years old when I actually tasted cereal for the first time, because I was really conscious of it. And I took this bite, and it was like, I mean, of course, it kind of tastes the same way that it always did, but I'm really present to it. And that's enjoyment, is just really being conscious to the experiences that you're probably already having. Kind of another way of thinking of being in the present moment. Satisfaction is the joy from a job well done, kind of appreciating what you've accomplished, and even appreciating just the effort that you put into it, even if you didn't accomplish anything. And then even being able to appreciate suffering, like we talk about all the time in class, that feeling that we get from being really pushed or kind of running up against the wall. If we can enjoy that, that's great, because then we will keep pushing ourselves, keep getting stronger. So satisfaction is kind of that, the enjoyment that you seek from the effort. And purpose is something that I talk about with my wife all the time. My wife is a lawyer, and she hates it. And if you work for her and you're listening to this, I don't know why, but she will probably keep being a lawyer for the rest of her life, because she's like, I don't know what I want to do. I just know that it's not being a lawyer. She's like, I don't know what my purpose is. And she hates me because I found what I love doing. There's nothing that I would rather do, and it's not just because I enjoy it. It's because it really feels like a calling to me. Teaching and being on the mats and all that is truly enjoyable. It feels like a purpose for me. And this professor suggests that if you have a hard time finding your purpose, and it does not have to be what you do for a job. If you're lucky like me, wonderful. But it can be something that you're just doing outside of your work. If you have a hard time finding that, it is great to ask these two questions. Why am I alive? Or like, what is it that I can live for? And then what would I be willing to die for? And I heard this years and years ago. Mai Sifu talked about this in one of his talks. And I was like a year or two into practice, and I heard it, and I was like, martial arts, sir. I would live for martial arts, and I would die for martial arts. I would prefer not to die for martial arts. If I really had to, maybe I would make that choice. It's probably more of a combination of like my child, my family, and martial arts. But finding that purpose and boiling it down to those two things, like what am I alive for? What am I willing to devote myself to in this life? And then also, what would I be willing to die for? Would be great. Nobody kill me to test my martial arts love. He talked a quick bit about social media, which I think you already know what I'm going to say. He described it as the junk food of social interaction, and kind of in the same way we're talking about before with dopamine. You just get a quick oxytocin rush, and then it kind of disappears, but then you kind of seek more and more of it. And this is what happens when we're doom scrolling or we're looking through Facebook. We get that little ding of a message or whatever, and really our whole phone and so much of the junk in our lives is designed to kind of push that button and make us keep going back to it. But it does not make us happy. So his suggestion is use it only to complement in-person interactions and in-person actual relationships. Now look, if you want to join class on Zoom, that's great. Watch the talk on Facebook, wonderful. But it's like if that's your only social interaction, of course, you are not going to be getting the same kind of satisfaction as an in-depth, personal, in-person interaction. So he suggests spend no longer than 30 minutes per day total. That's your Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And I know it's very hard to get off of TikTok earlier than like 2 hours, but 30 minutes total for all of that stuff. He then went into this, I don't remember what the question was, but talking about this happiness curve. There's this curious kind of inverted, I don't know if it's an inverted curve or what, it's a shape like this, a U curve basically, or kind of like a V. And I've been talking about this with my friend who about 2 years ago had his first baby, and he was talking about how like, for him, it's very clearly like a lack of sleep. But for many people, around the age of 40, which is right about where I am, we start to experience this clear decline in happiness, and then it starts to go back up. And it's not like I go from I'm a 10 out of 10, so happy every day, to I'm a 0 and I hate my life. I mean, that does happen for some people, obviously. But the average kind of aggregate measurement of happiness across people in all different situations is I go from like an 8 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. And then you steadily go back up after that. And some of the reasons for this could be I'm sleeping less because I had a kid. It could be more reliably like we have these expectations of life, and we expected to have accomplished them by 40. Did not happen. This is where you are right now. Get ready for the next 10 years. It's going to be a steady like this. And then when you start to realize that getting your expectations, or even just as I was talking about last week, like the ups and downs of life, that none of this will last. And it's okay that it doesn't last. And in fact, it's great that it doesn't last. When we get that perspective about our desires and just the rhythms of life, then happiness starts to go back up because we're better able to deal with it, whether it's lowered expectations or kind of riding the waves or whatever. And so we can expect this. It's pretty, it is pretty guaranteed. We'll experience some kind of a dip and then it rises back up. That does not happen for two groups of people. If you have unremediated or untreated mental illness, like depression or anxiety, or an untreated substance abuse addiction, something like that. So if you're experiencing that, deal with it so that you can get back up on this curve. And I thought it was fascinating how fairly reliable that is kind of across the board for most people. So whatever your circumstances are, you can see that this kind of curve is going to happen to you. He also taught. Oh, this is later on. There's a different curve that I'll discuss later. That'll be what we end with. Another question was dealing with fear of mortality. And I think the older we get, the more present we get to this. Some of you guys know my mom passed a couple years ago, and when your parent dies, it takes you for a ride, and one of the most consistent things that it changed for me was I find myself thinking about death a whole lot more. And of course I miss my mom, and it was a little bit traumatic for me to be in the room with her. I'm very glad that I got to do that, but also like there's some trauma there of just like actually thinking and like reliving that moment where my mom finally took her last breath. And made me think a lot about this, made me think a lot about dying and my own death and the death of the other people in my life that I love and the death of all of you someday. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about you guys dying, but a little bit. He talks about a type of meditation which is similar to what I've discussed in the past in some Tibetan Buddhist and I'm sure other Buddhist traditions. They like to go to the graveyard and meditate. And in the graveyard, of course, it's very peaceful. Very few people are making a ruckus in the graveyard. But it's also like you finish your meditation and you're very present to the limited time that you have. So if you're thinking of it in terms of like, I'm trying to get enlightened this life, make the most progress that I can make, being reminded of the shortness of it all is a great way to go about that. This is more specifically dealing with the fear of death. And he calls this a death meditation where you look at images, pictures, I'm sure in some cases they're photographs or in some cases they're paintings or whatever, of corpses in varying stages of decomposition. So this corpse is just dead. This corpse is dead and starting to fall apart. This is a skeleton. Maybe there's dust over here. And by just pondering those various stages of death and after death, you are kind of experiencing that fear. And I think that there is certainly a way to do this that would be very unhealthy, but when you think about it in terms of just coming to terms with it and kind of being okay with the fear and dealing with it in a way so that it becomes kind of mundane or everyday. Now, this was absolutely a big part of a lot of martial arts practices. For samurai, they would talk about this all the time. Samurai would say, die daily. And they were probably talking about doing a meditation that's like this, like imagining your own death. And therefore, when you're actually faced with it on the battlefield, it doesn't scare you to the point where you freeze up and you're unable to respond. Could be just an actual meditation, because when you meditate and you get beyond thought and maybe you get beyond ego, you're kind of just in that moment of pure peace and nothingness that is pretty much like death. And then maybe you're thinking like, well, when I die, I'm going to go to heaven, whatever else, fine. But just the moment of death and the act of dying, if that is what you keep thinking about, then consider this idea. Because, of course, thinking a lot about death and having it be something that causes you lots of anguish or unhappiness is going to be something that doesn't help you be happy. He used this phrase of time traveling. We all love a time travel movie, thinking about where would I go? I'd go back and kill Hitler or whatever else it is. But we all time travel all the time. And this is when he's talking about mindfulness. I love this way. I use the idea of going on vacation, and when you're on vacation, you're actually just thinking about where you're going to be in 5 more days, and you're just like, oh, I'm on vacation now, but I'm stressed because I'm thinking about how I'm going to go back to work. He used it in a different way. He's talking about when we go on vacation, we take pictures, And the way they describe this is pretty hilarious. Like, we think of the present when we're taking pictures of what's happening now. We're thinking of the present as if it's in the past, in the future, that we're looking back on it. Because we're taking this picture so that in the future, we can look back on this moment and how messed up is that? We're traveling like back and forth in time 10 times in this moment of just taking this picture. And of course, when you're taking the picture, you're not really present and enjoying what's actually happening. And it's like you're just missing life. You're just always thinking about how the future you is going to come back thinking about this, or you're thinking about what's going to happen in the future and you're stressed about it. None of that is just being in the present and enjoying life. So this is not to say that you should never take pictures, and certainly not to say that you should not go on vacation, but try to just be wherever you are, and in that moment is it. There's no higher purpose than this present moment, this breath. And in meditation, this really is what we're practicing, just being here. This breath is the most exciting thing, the only thing that really matters for us. Then maybe if you're on the beach, you'll enjoy it even more. So wisdom, this is the last thing. I'm good because I'm way running out of time. So this is kind of a similar curve. It kind of happens at a different time, though. So we have this fluid intelligence. And you've probably heard before that our brains are still forming in our 20s, but even into the 30s, we kind of have this increase in certain things like working memory, problem solving, the ability to quickly think and kind of innovate, kind of goes up and peaks at around our late 30s, and then it starts to drop again. And some of us that are past that time have started to experience that precipitous drop in our ability to think quickly and innovate and all that stuff. Sometimes you come in and I just do the same combinations all over again. But there's something else, and this is really what easy for me to say. This is what wisdom is crystallized intelligence, which peaks much later on. We keep getting better at this kind of intelligence, and it stays high through the 70s and 80s. And this is like recognizing patterns, being able to recognize what's going to happen, what's likely to happen, and then he throws in here leading and mentoring. And so he says the essence of wisdom is being able to understand what things really mean and then using that in service of others. And I think that is a wonderful way to think of wisdom. If you just keep it for yourself, you're not going to seem very wise because nobody has any idea what you're thinking. And then being able to share that with other people, maybe you are kind of leading a team of people who are kind of in that earlier phase of intelligence, where they are able to make really quick decisions, or they're able to innovate more. But then you've got this kind of guiding hand, and this kind of system of mentorship. Absolutely, martial arts is based on this. You'll notice how I hardly ever have the brand new people teach the class to the people who've been here for longer. It usually goes the other way around. And this is part of the idea. And those of you who are newer to it, you don't have to be in your 20s or 30s, but you're kind of newer in your martial arts practice. There is more innovation going on there. And there is something that those of us who've been practicing for longer can still learn from somebody newer to practice. That's great. It's the way that it always has been and always should be. So we're late to start our meditation. That is a lot of stuff. You don't need to remember all of it, please. But the rundown, again, of the basic ideas: happiness versus unhappiness, trying to lower the unhappiness factors, getting off of that cycle of desire so we're not always seeking the dopamine rush for the next highest thing. The brain kind of having three different functions: the lizard brain, the limbic system, which feels stuff, and then what we can really try to do, especially with meditation, is to kind of get some separation between our feelings and the decisions that we make, how we want to act. Practicing gratitude, happiness being a combination between enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. Stop using social media. This inverted curve, this U-curve of happiness, and then the curve that goes like this for intelligence, but wisdom just kind of keeps going like that. Lowered expectations. Meditating on death. If you want to meditate on death today, okay. But it's a good thing to consider from time to time. And then mindfulness, just being here now instead of time traveling. So sometimes it can be fun to kind of take mental pictures like this and be like, I'm going to remember this next time. Sometimes we take an actual picture, we write it down, whatever. But the essence of our practice on some level is really learning to be present And this truly is what meditation is for on a really deep level, is can we be present for this breath, for this moment, and not be wishing that we were somewhere else, not be kind of taking that picture metaphorically, time traveling because we're thinking about what we're going to eat for dinner after we're done with meditation. This is it, this moment right here. And I like to think of each breath as like I'm breathing in an entire lifetime worth of experience. So try that with your meditation tonight. Sit comfortably. You're going to bring my stuff out here, right, Sam? Thanks, sir. That's why you snuck out there. So, a reminder of posture. You can sit in several different ways. I like to sit seiza on my knees, but cross-legged works just as well, as long as you are not sitting in a position where your knees are sticking way up, because then your legs will fall asleep. Your spine is straight from the base of the skull to the tailbone. Not rigid, but straight, stacked. Your shoulders are rolled back and your chin is parallel to the ground. Hands upturned. They can be together or separate, but you don't want to be slouching like this. So having your hands in this position can be helpful. Close eyes. Relax. Watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. Be here now. Your mind wanders, you start to time travel, just bring it back to this breath and this moment. You do that as many times as you can throughout this meditation. You just feel the sensation of the breath moving through your nose or moving through your belly. And you're doing this without judgment. If you have a thought, instead of beating yourself up, just label it as thought and return back to the breath.